The chandelier at Bellamy's caught fire in the polished silver, splitting light into 1,000 fractured diamonds across white tablecloths. 180 diners sat in the kind of silence money buys, the rustle of silk, the clink of crystal, the murmur of deals worth more than most people earn in lifetimes. A woman in a black uniform stood center stage, blonde hair pulled tight, holding a bottle of Bordeaux that cost more than her monthly rent. Across from her, a man in navy brioni rose from his chair, face the color of spoiled meat, fingers stabbing air like a blade. His voice cut through 2 centuries of supposed civility. "Security! Arrest this woman! She's been recording me illegally." The woman didn't run, didn't flinch. She removed her apron with the deliberation of someone shedding skin, folded it into a perfect square, placed it on the chair beside table 12. When she spoke, her voice carried none of the deference that had colored it moments before. Now it was sharp, educated, dangerous. The French that poured from her lips was Parisian perfect, each syllable a small detonation. "Monsieur, vous avez détruit ma vie. Maintenant, je reprends ma voix." Then German, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian. Each language another nail in a coffin the man didn't yet know he was building for himself. A red-headed CEO in the corner booth leaned toward her companion, eyes wide. Who the hell is she? Phones emerged from purses and pockets. Camera lights blinked red. The world was about to tilt on its axis, and no one in that room understood they were witnessing the moment it began. But to understand how we arrived at this burning point, you have to go back 22 months to when Victoria Ashford still believed the world operated on merit. The office overlooked Boston Harbor from the 12th floor of a converted warehouse in South Boston. All exposed brick and reclaimed wood, the kind of space that screamed startup success without the arrogance of a financial district tower. 85 faces turned toward the woman standing beneath a projection screen, their founder, their CEO, the reason most of them had left stable jobs at Google and Amazon to build something that mattered. Victoria Ashford was 31 and looked like someone who'd spent her 20s in libraries, blonde hair always escaping its clip, glasses that sat crooked on her nose, a blazer worn over jeans because she refused to perform the full costume of power. She'd grown up in Portland, Maine, daughter of a linguistics professor who taught her Latin before she could ride a bike, who believed language was the great equalizer, the tool that could lift anyone from anywhere into the conversations that shaped the world. She was about to tell her team they'd won. The words came easy because they were true. "We just closed Series B, 42 million from Summit Ventures, which means Polyglot Pro is now free for every refugee, every immigrant, every Title I school in America. No more paywall, no more barriers, just learning." The applause started slow, then built like a wave. Developers who'd worked 70-hour weeks for equity instead of market salaries. Linguists who'd abandoned tenure-track positions. Designers who believed beautiful things should be accessible. They were young and brilliant and convinced they were changing the world. And Victoria loved them for their faith, even as a small part of her wondered if faith was enough. In the back row, a man in a charcoal suit didn't clap. He sat perfectly still, pen moving across a leather notebook, cataloging everything. Elliot Hargrove had the face of someone who'd clawed his way up from nothing and never forgotten the taste of dirt in his mouth. 56, silver hair immaculate, a scar on his chin from a childhood accident he never discussed. Eyes that calculated value the way other people calculated breath. Lena Barrett touched Victoria's elbow as the applause died down. The CFO was 38, practical to her bones, the kind of person who caught mistakes before they became disasters. Her whisper carried concern. "Who's the guy in back? He's not from Summit." Victoria followed her gaze, found those cold eyes studying her like a specimen. "Maybe they brought someone from due diligence. We'll ask after." The meeting dissolved into congratulations and plans for celebration. Victoria stayed late, as she always did, answering questions about the roadmap, reassuring the engineers that, yes, they'd have budget for the features they dreamed up, watching her team file out into the summer evening with the kind of hope that made everything, the exhaustion, the sacrifice, the mortgage she'd taken on her father's care, feel worth it. Her laptop dinged as she packed up. Email from an address she didn't recognize. No subject line, just 4 words that should have mattered more than they did. They're buying shares behind your back. Check cap table. A friend. She deleted it. Spam always found creative ways to slip through filters. She had a father to visit before the nursing facility stopped allowing guests, and paranoia was a luxury she couldn't afford. The Meadowbrook Skilled Nursing Facility sat 40 minutes north in a suburb that tried hard to pretend it wasn't dying. Vinyl siding peeling on triple-deckers, corner stores with bars on windows, the kind of neighborhood where people worked 3 jobs and still couldn't make rent. The facility itself was clean enough: bleach and boiled vegetables, hallways lined with railings, nurses who did their best with inadequate staffing. But it was the best Victoria could afford at $9,200 a month, and even that was destroying her. Philip Ashford had been a giant once, professor of linguistics at Bowdoin College for 33 years, the kind of teacher students remembered decades later, the one who made dead languages live, who could trace the evolution of a single word across 5 millennia and make you understand that language was humanity's greatest invention. He'd taught his daughter 8 languages before she hit puberty, not as party tricks but as ways of seeing, frameworks for understanding how different cultures carved up reality. The stroke 8 months ago had stolen most of that. Now he sat in a wheelchair by the window, 64 years old and trapped in a body that no longer obeyed, staring at a courtyard he couldn't reach. Victoria pulled a chair close, took his hand. The skin was papery, spotted, nothing like the hands that used to gesture wildly during lectures. His eyes found hers, and something flickered. Recognition, love, something that hadn't been erased yet. The words came slow, vowels stretched and slurred. Victoria, my girl. Hey, Dad, brought you something. She pulled a book from her bag, the Aeneid, Latin on one page, English facing. They used to read it together, her translating while he corrected her ablatives. Thought we could try a few lines? His good hand, the left one still worked mostly, reached for the book with something like hunger. He opened it to a page marked with ribbon, ran his finger along the Latin, lips moving soundlessly. Then, clearer than he'd spoken in months, the old muscle memory kicking in. Arma virumque cano. I sing of arms and a man. Victoria's throat closed. She joined him for the next line, their voices unsteady but together. And for 5 minutes he was himself again, the professor who believed stories were the only immortality humans ever achieved. When they finished the passage, he gripped her hand with surprising strength. His eyes were wet. You, building something, good thing, important. I'm trying, Dad. Language sets you free. Never, never let them silence you. The words sat strange, prophetic in a way she wouldn't understand for months. She kissed his forehead, promised to visit in 3 days, walked back to her car through the parking lot where the asphalt had cracked into geometric patterns like a map of somewhere broken. Her phone showed the reality she'd been avoiding. Credit card balance, $27,000 and climbing. Student loan payment due. Rent on her Cambridge studio. And the check she wrote to Meadowbrook every month that left her account gasping. Summit's $42 million wasn't hers. It belonged to the company, the growth plan, the mission. Her salary as CEO was $75,000, generous for a nonprofit structure, poverty for Boston, barely enough to keep the careful architecture of her life from collapsing. But she'd made it work this long. She could make it work longer. The email she'd deleted nagged at her during the drive back. Probably nothing. Definitely nothing. Still, she pulled up the cap table on her laptop that night, cross-referenced the shareholder list against the one from 3 months ago. 3 shell companies she didn't recognize had acquired positions from early employees who'd wanted to cash out. Small positions, 2% here, 3% there. Collectively, they added up to 8% of the company. Not controlling, not yet, but enough to be a board observer, enough to see everything. She made a note to ask Lena about it in the morning, then fell asleep to the sound of sirens and the weight of something she couldn't name. Trevor Kent had been hired 9 months earlier because Victoria needed someone who understood operations at scale. And Trevor came with a resume that looked like a LinkedIn fever dream. McKinsey, Bain, 2 successful exits. He was 42, starting to go soft around the middle. The kind of person who sweated through shirts by noon and always carried an iPad like a shield against uncertainty. He was also, unbeknownst to Victoria, a man who'd sold his integrity for $500,000 and a promise. It was 1 in the morning when Victoria returned to the office to grab the laptop she'd forgotten in her rush to visit her father. The building should have been empty. Even the most dedicated engineers went home eventually, but light spilled from her office, and through the glass wall she could see Trevor hunched over her desk, USB drive glowing blue in the port. Her footsteps made no sound on the concrete floor. She reached the doorway just as he pulled the drive free, slipped it into his pocket. The shock must have shown on her face because he jumped, nearly knocked over her coffee mug, hand flying to his chest. "Tori, Jesus, you scared the hell out of me." "What are you doing in my office?" Sweat beaded on his upper lip despite the aggressive air conditioning. "Looking for the Q3 metrics. I couldn't find the thread on Slack, figured you had them in a local file." "At 1 in the morning? I'm behind on the board deck. Wanted to get ahead before tomorrow's meeting." He smiled, but it was the smile of someone who'd practiced it too many times in a mirror. "Should have texted you. Sorry. Didn't want to wake you." Her eyes dropped to his pocket where the USB had disappeared. The outline was visible through the fabric. She was certain she'd seen Hargrove Capital embossed on the metal. "What's on the drive?" "What drive?" "The one you just put in your pocket." His laugh came out strangled. "This? Just backups. Personal files. I use your office sometimes when I need quiet. Hope that's okay." It wasn't okay. None of this was okay. But Victoria had been raised to give people the benefit of doubt, to believe in second chances, to assume good faith until proven otherwise. Trevor had 2 kids in private school and a mortgage in Newton. He was stressed, overworked, probably making mistakes born of exhaustion rather than malice. She let it go. "Just ask next time. My files are sensitive." "Absolutely. Won't happen again." He edged past her, iPad clutched to his chest, moving too fast for someone with nothing to hide. After he left, Victoria sat at her desk and tried to reconstruct what she'd seen. The USB had definitely said something, Hargrove something. But Trevor worked with lots of investors, lots of partners. It could have been anything. She opened her laptop, checked the access logs. Trevor had been in her email for 47 minutes, had opened 230 messages, had downloaded attachments she couldn't track without calling IT. The wrongness of it crawled under her skin, but she was tired, and her father's face kept swimming up in memory, and she had a board meeting in 8 hours where she needed to perform confidence she didn't entirely feel. Tomorrow. She'd deal with it tomorrow. Tomorrow came with a headline that destroyed her life. TechCrunch. Polyglot Pro's AI teaches wrong Arabic pronunciation to 68,000 users. CEO hid bug for weeks. Victoria's hands went numb scrolling through the article. They had screenshots of internal emails, messages between her and the engineering lead where she'd written, "Don't announce this publicly yet. We need 10 more days to fix the algorithm before we disclose. Announcing now kills our Series C fundraising." The bug was real, a critical flaw in the pronunciation engine that had taught incorrect Arabic phonemes to 68,000 users, most of them refugees trying to learn English, immigrants preparing for citizenship tests, people who trusted Polyglot Pro because it was supposed to be better than the profit-driven alternatives. Victoria had known about it for 3 weeks, had thrown the entire engineering team at fixing it, had planned to announce the bug and the fix simultaneously. A mistake acknowledged and corrected, the kind of transparency that built trust. But someone had leaked the emails without the context, made it look like she was covering up to protect her next funding round, made it look like she cared more about money than the users she claimed to serve. Her phone erupted. 47 missed calls, text messages filling the screen faster than she could read. Investors, board members, journalists, her mother calling from Maine, voice shaking. "Honey, what's happening? The news is saying..." The emergency board meeting convened at 10. Lena looked sick. Trevor looked nervous. Nate Pierce, her angel investor and the closest thing she had to an ally, sat rigid in his Brooks Brothers suit, face unreadable. And at the head of the table, newly minted board member Elliot Hargrove arranged papers with the precision of someone setting a trap. His voice was Appalachian, smoothed by MIT and 30 years on Wall Street, still carrying the ghost of coal country. "Miss Ashford, I'll be direct. You signed representations and warranties promising no known material defects in the product. This bug affects 68,000 users. That's material, and you knew. I was fixing it. You were hiding it. There's a difference." The Summit Ventures partners exchanged glances. Victoria recognized the look. They were calculating exit strategies, figuring out how to salvage their investment from the CEO they'd backed 3 months ago. Hargrove continued, voice gentle as a knife between ribs. "Furthermore, you signed a personal guarantee on the Series B debt financing. If company valuation drops below $30 million, you're personally liable for the $18 million shortfall." The room tilted. Victoria gripped the table edge. "What? I never..." Lena's whisper was barely audible. "Page 47 of the term sheet. I flagged it during negotiations, but you said it was standard, said we'd never drop that low." Memory surfaced, signing documents at midnight, exhausted from due diligence, trusting that the lawyers had protected her, that investors wouldn't include poison pills in deals with companies they believed in. Naive. Stupid. Fatal. Hargrove let the silence breathe before moving for the kill. "I move to remove Victoria Ashford as CEO effective immediately for breach of fiduciary duty and material misrepresentation." Second, Trevor's voice. Of course, Trevor's voice. The vote was quick. 4 Summit partners voted yes. Lena voted no, tears on her cheeks. Nate voted no, jaw so tight Victoria thought it might crack. Trevor voted yes. 5-2. Motion carried. Security appeared as if summoned. 2 men in uniform who wouldn't meet her eyes, who escorted her from the building she'd poured 3 years of her life into. Past employees who looked away because they didn't know what else to do. Out into September sunshine that felt like mockery. Nate caught her in the parking lot. He was 61, silver-haired and patrician, the kind of old-money New Englander who wore his privilege like an inheritance he hadn't asked for, but accepted anyway. Since investing in Polyglot Pro, he'd been distant but supportive. Quarterly check-ins, occasional advice, nothing that suggested he cared beyond the ROI. Now his voice carried something Victoria had never heard from him. Desperation. "I'm sorry, I didn't have enough shares to block the vote." She was crying without meaning to, standing beside her Honda Civic that needed new tires she couldn't afford. "It's not your fault. The check I gave you, for your father, please cash it now. You'll need it." "I can't take charity." His control cracked, just for a moment, something raw beneath the wasp veneer. "It's not charity, it's..." He stopped, recalibrated. "Please, let me help." "Why do you even care?" The question hung between them. Nate looked away, toward the harbor where sailboats carved white lines through blue. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "You remind me of someone. My daughter, Isabel. She taught immigrant kids. believed in the same things you do. Same damn stubborn refusal to accept help. Where is she now? Dead. 2 years. Drunk driver ran a red light. His eyes were wet when they found Victoria's face again. You have her fire, her idealism. I couldn't save her. Let me at least help you. But Victoria's pride was all she had left, the only part of herself that hadn't been taken in that boardroom. She shook her head, got in her car, drove away from the man who just offered her a lifeline she was too broken to grab. The lawsuit papers arrived 4 days later. Investors seeking $18 million in personal damages. The bankruptcy lawyer explained Chapter 11 like he was ordering lunch. Dispassionate, efficient, the arithmetic of collapse. Her Cambridge studio would be seized. Bank accounts frozen. Credit destroyed. She lost the apartment on a Tuesday, lost her health insurance on a Wednesday. On Thursday, her father had a second stroke, massive and devastating, the kind that steals language permanently and leaves only fragments of the person who used to live behind those eyes. The hospital bill was $53,000 for 4 days in ICU. Her old insurance would have covered most of it. Her current insurance, non-existent, covered nothing. The doctor was kind but clear. He needs long-term skilled nursing, minimum $9,200 monthly. But without insurance, I'll figure it out. She sat in the hospital cafeteria at 2 in the morning, laptop open, searching for jobs she was simultaneously overqualified and unhireable for. Disgraced CEO was a scarlet letter that showed up in every background check. 22 applications, 22 rejections. Her brother called from Seattle, voice tight with worry. Come here. Crash with me. I know people at Amazon, they're hiring. What about Dad? Silence. They both knew what happened to indigent stroke patients. State facilities with hallways that smelled like death deferred. Shared rooms. Staff stretched so thin that dignity became negotiable. Ethan tried again. You can't save him if you're drowning. I'm not drowning. I'm treading water. Tori, I have to go. She hung up before he could argue, before the truth in his words could crack what remained of her resolve. The decision came in the shower of the motel where she was staying week to week, $40 a night for a room that smelled like cigarettes and broken promises. She'd have to disappear, become someone new, someone the Google search couldn't find. Tessa Mills had no history, no scandal, no PhD from MIT. Tessa Mills was just a woman who needed work and couldn't afford to be picky. She cut her hair in the motel bathroom, 8 inches falling into the sink, but makeup at CVS to change the shape of her face. Threw away the glasses, wore contacts that made her eyes itch, created a Gmail account with no connection to her real name, a resume that listed community college dropout and 3 years in food service at restaurants that no longer existed. Applied to 41 fine dining establishments in Greater Boston. 40 rejections. Overqualified, underqualified, something in her eyes that suggested she didn't belong. The 41st was Bellamy's, a French restaurant in Back Bay where Wall Street types took clients they wanted to impress, and expense accounts went to die. The manager was Ronald Delaney, 48 and already defeated by life, bald and bitter, and perpetually sweating despite the Arctic air conditioning. He barely looked at her application. College? Didn't finish. Good. College kids quit after 2 weeks when they realize how hard this is. You willing to work weekends? Yes, sir. Tips are good here if you smile and don't talk back. 3-day trial. Screw up and you're gone. She learned to balance trays. Learn the difference between Burgundy and Bordeaux. Information she already knew but had to pretend to discover. Learn to make herself invisible, to move through rooms without disturbing the air, to absorb insults with the kind of grace that came from understanding she had no other choice. Grace Sullivan took her under wing the second week. 52, Irish immigrant who'd been waitressing for 20 years, face lined with exhaustion and something harder to name. She spoke in whispers during the chaos of dinner service. "Ron's an ass, but he's a predictable ass. Don't argue. Don't make eye contact with the men unless you want trouble. And table 12, that's sacred ground. VIP every Friday. Elliot Hargrove, hedge fund guy, tips 300 if you're perfect, stiffs you if you breathe wrong." Victoria's blood went cold. "Elliot Hargrove comes here? Like clockwork, 7:30, table 12. Brings different people every week. Rich assholes talking about how to get richer." Grace studied her with eyes that had seen too much. "You know him?" "No, just heard the name." It was a lie that tasted like ash. But it was also the truth she needed Grace to believe. Because Victoria had already decided. She was going to serve Elliot Hargrove, was going to smile and pour his wine and listen to every word he said, was going to record it all with the $35 voice recorder she'd bought at Best Buy and hidden in her apron, was going to gather evidence until she had enough to destroy him the way he'd destroyed her. The first time she approached table 12, her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the water pitcher. Hargrove sat reading the Financial Times, navy suit that probably cost $5,000, silver hair immaculate under the low lighting. He didn't recognize her. Why would he? The CEO, who'd sat across from him in a boardroom, was a different species from the waitress bringing him sparkling water. Her voice came out steady despite everything. "Good evening, sir. My name is Tessa. I'll be serving you tonight." He didn't look up. "San Pellegrino. Tell chef if the Dover sole is dry again, I'm sending it back." "Of course, sir." As she walked away, his phone conversation drifted across the dining room, loud and careless. "Yeah, the Ashford woman is finished. Bankruptcy hearing next month. I'm buying Polyglot's IP for $4 million. Algorithms worth $60 million easy. She built it. I'm taking it. Completely legal, too. Beautiful." The water pitcher trembled in her grip. The recorder in her apron was already running, capturing every syllable, every casual admission of the theft he'd orchestrated. Victoria set down the pitcher, smoothed her apron, walked back to the kitchen where she could breathe. In her head, her father's voice from a decade ago, teaching her Virgil in the study that smelled like pipe tobacco and old books. "Language is the only weapon they can't confiscate, Victoria. Learn it, then use it." She didn't know it yet, but over the next 12 weeks, she would collect 58 hours and 14 minutes of recordings, would learn the architecture of Hargrove's corruption, the names of everyone he'd bribed, the offshore accounts where he hid his spoils. And one night, in this same dining room where she now carried trays and swallowed humiliation, she would speak 8 languages in rapid succession and burn his empire to ash. But that night was still 12 weeks away. Tonight, she was just a waitress trying not to drown. She poured the San Pellegrino into Hargrove's glass, watched the bubbles rise and burst, and thought about fire. 12 weeks passed like water through a sieve, each shift bleeding into the next, until Victoria could no longer remember what it felt like to wake up without the taste of fear in her mouth. The motel room became a cell she paid for nightly, $40 she could barely spare, walls thin enough to hear strangers coupling and fighting, and sometimes just breathing the shallow breaths of people hanging on by threads. She visited her father every Sunday, the only day Ron gave her off, and watched him disappear a little more each time. Philip no longer recognized her consistently. Sometimes she was his daughter. Sometimes she was a nurse. Sometimes she was his mother, dead 30 years, and he'd cry asking why she'd left him alone. The nursing facility administrator cornered her in the hallway after the 3rd week. "Ms. Ashford, your payment is 17 days overdue. We've been understanding, but we need $27,000 by month's end, or we'll have to transfer your father to a state facility." $27,000. She was making $2,400 a month, carrying plates for people who treated her like furniture. The math was a noose, tightening by degrees. At Bellamy's, she learned the topography of invisible labor, how to predict when a diner would snap their fingers without turning around, How to read the pitch of conversation and know when water glasses needed refilling before anyone asked. How to absorb the casual cruelty that rich people dispense like breath. Comments about her intelligence, her background, her worth, and transform her face into a mask that revealed nothing. Hargrove came every Friday like scripture promised. Always table 12. Always 7:30. Always with someone new he was teaching the gospel of extraction. Junior partners from his firm, potential investors, occasionally senators or regulators he was courting with wine that cost more than most people's rent. Victoria made certain she served him every single time. Ron thought she was angling for the tips, which were reliably $300 if she performed her servitude correctly. He didn't know about the recorder in her apron that captured every word, every casual admission of fraud, every blueprint of corruption that Hargrove laid out like he was protected by divine right. Week 5 brought the first major score. Hargrove was dining with Preston Vale, a hedge fund manager whose face appeared on CNBC whenever markets needed someone to explain why working people deserved to suffer more. Their conversation started with the usual performance, sports, mistresses, the amusing incompetence of people who actually work for a living. Then Vale leaned in, voice dropping to something he clearly thought was confidential. How'd you know about the polyglot bug before it hit the news? That short position you took was surgical. Victoria was pouring wine 2 feet away. Her hands didn't shake. The recorder was running. Hargrove's laugh was wet gravel. Inside man, Trevor Kent, COO, been feeding me everything for 8 months. Emails, product roadmaps, bug reports, kids got alimony and private school tuition. Makes people flexible. You paid him? $500,000 up front, another half when I took control, cheap for what I got. He swirled his Chateau Neuf, watching the legs form on glass. Shorted the Series B debt 2 days before the leak. Made $11 million on the trade in 3 days. Preston whistled low. SEC doesn't care? SEC can't prove anything. I used Trevor's accounts for the initial trades, routed through 3 offshore entities. By the time it traces back to me, if it ever does, I'll have lawyers arguing it was all coincidence. Market timing. Luck. Another sip. The secret to insider trading is making it look like genius. Victoria finished pouring. Her voice came out steady as a knife. Will there be anything else, gentlemen? Hargrove waved her away without looking up. To him, she was wallpaper, decoration, something that existed to serve and then disappeared from consciousness the moment it left his sightline. That night she labeled the recording File 23, Trevor Confession, and added it to the growing archive on the encrypted drive she'd bought with money she should have spent on food. 23 recordings, 47 hours total, a map of Hargrove's criminal empire drawn in his own words. But it wasn't enough yet. She needed the offshore accounts, needed the names of everyone he'd bribed, needed evidence so overwhelming that even expensive lawyers couldn't make it disappear. Week 9 brought Hargrove's escalation. He'd been testing her from the beginning, sending back perfectly cooked food, demanding bottles of wine he knew they didn't stock, speaking to her in the tone people reserve for animals they're training. But that Friday he was performing for someone new. A junior associate named Landon Shaw, who was learning how to be a predator by watching the apex species work. Victoria brought the wine, Chateau Margaux, 1996, $3,400, the kind of Bordeaux her father used to talk about in reverent tones during the years before the stroke, when they could still afford small luxuries. She'd learned the vintage's characteristics from a book Grace had lent her. Though she'd known them already from courses at MIT, from trips to France she'd taken back when she could afford to believe the world was larger than her servitude. She presented the bottle with the ritual Bellamy's demanded. Chateau Margaux, Premier Grand Cru Classé from the Margaux appellation. 1996 vintage. Exceptional year for the left bank. Notes of blackcurrant, violet, and graphite with silky tannins. Hargrove's eyes narrowed. He didn't like the help speaking with confidence. "Don't lecture me, sweetheart. You memorize that from the sommelier like a trained parrot." "Poor." Landon shifted uncomfortably. "Elliot, she's just doing her job." "She's doing what she's told. There's a difference." Victoria poured the tasting measure, 2 ounces that caught the light like liquid ruby. Hargrove lifted it, swirled aggressively, inhaled with theatrical displeasure. He tasted, held the wine in his mouth for a count of 5, then grimaced like she'd served him poison. The word came out sharp and loud enough for neighboring tables to hear. "Corked!" Every instinct Victoria had said otherwise. She'd inspected the cork personally. No TCA contamination, no musty smell, the closure perfect. The wine had been stored at 55 degrees with controlled humidity in Bellamy's climate-controlled cellar. She knew because she'd asked Grace, who'd asked the sommelier, who'd shown her the logs because he was kind and overworked and appreciated someone taking interest. The words escaped before she could trap them. "Sir, I checked the cork myself. No contamination. The wine's been properly stored at 55 degrees, 70% humidity. Perhaps the tannins just need a moment to open." The change in Hargrove was instant and terrible. He stood, 6'1" in custom shoes, looming across the table with a kind of physical dominance he probably learned in childhood. The language of men who use size to make others small. His voice carried venom wrapped in silk. "Did you just correct me? Who the fuck do you think you are?" The dining room conversation died. 180 people stopped eating, stopped talking, turned to watch a man unmake a woman in public because he could, because power meant never having to treat the powerless like humans. Victoria's jaw locked. Every nerve screamed at her to apologize, to grovel, to save the job she desperately needed. But something deeper wouldn't bend. The part of her that was still her father's daughter. Still someone who'd earned a doctorate by proving people wrong. Still a person who remembered what it felt like to speak truth without permission. She said nothing. The silence was its own rebellion. Hargrove leaned closer, bringing the smell of cologne and contempt. "You are a waitress. You carry plates. You wipe tables. You do not educate me about wine. I have socks that cost more than your yearly salary. Hell, I have socks that cost more than your entire education, such as it was." Landon tried again, embarrassment coloring his voice. "Elliot, that's enough. Shut up. You're learning something here." Hargrove turned back to Victoria, eyes traveling over her like she was something he might buy or discard based on a whim. "Look at those empty eyes. Probably dropped out of community college after a semester. What was it? Tried to make it as an Instagram influencer? OnlyFans didn't pan out? Now you're here, serving your betters, because you have no skills and no ambition. Evolutionarily obsolete." The phrase landed like a slap. Victoria saw her father in the wheelchair, drool on his chin, trying to remember the Latin that had once flowed from him like water. Saw her company with someone else's name on the door. Saw her studio apartment being emptied by sheriffs while she stood on the sidewalk with garbage bags of everything she still owned. But beneath the humiliation, something else was building. A calculation running in the background of her consciousness, adding up all the recordings, all the evidence, all the hours she'd spent swallowing degradation while Hargrove talked freely about his crimes because he genuinely believed service workers weren't people. He kept going, performing now for the entire dining room. "You know what you are? You're a placeholder, a zero. You exist to make people like me comfortable. That's your entire evolutionary purpose. And the sooner you accept that, the easier your meaningless little life will be." The flashback hit without warning. Her father at 6 in the morning, when she was 6 years old, teaching her Latin before school, his voice gentle and firm. "Victoria, illiterate comes from Latin illiteratus, without letters. But true illiteracy isn't inability to read words. It's inability to read the world, to understand context and consequence and the way actions echo through time. Don't ever let anyone call you illiterate. You read the world better than most people read street signs. Back in Bellamy's present, Hargrove was still talking. People like you, service class, need to understand your place, your background music, wallpaper. You serve and you disappear, and you're grateful for the crumbs we leave you. That's the natural order. Ron materialized at her elbow, sweating through his shirt, terror in his eyes because VIPs couldn't be upset, couldn't be challenged, couldn't be treated like they were anything other than gods dispensing grace to mortals. Tessa, what's happening here? Victoria looked at the wine bottle, at Hargrove's face, red and righteous, at the dining room full of people pretending not to stare while recording everything on phones held low beneath tables, at the apron in her hands where the recorder had captured every syllable of his performance. She'd collected 58 hours and 14 minutes of evidence over 12 weeks, had documented systematic fraud, insider trading, offshore tax evasion, bribery of public officials, sexual harassment of 3 different women who'd worked for him and been paid to stay silent. She'd planned to wait longer, to gather more, to build a case so overwhelming that even Hargrove's lawyers would advise settlement. But standing there with his contempt washing over her, watching him perform dominance for an audience that would forget her face before dessert arrived, Victoria made a different calculation. The evidence was enough. She was enough. And every additional week she waited was another week of letting him think he was untouchable. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who'd made a decision. She set the wine bottle down on the white tablecloth, not gently, but with a definitive thud that made the liquid inside shiver. Then she removed her apron, folded it with the same care she'd once used, folding letters of recommendation from MIT professors who'd believed in her potential, placed it over the back of an empty chair. Ron's voice climbed toward panic. Tessa, no, don't do this. Whatever he said, just apologize. She raised one hand and Ron went silent, years of conditioning making him obey, even though she had no authority over him, no power except the kind that comes from absolute certainty. Her posture shifted, shoulders back, spine straight. The servile hunch she'd cultivated for 12 weeks evaporating as muscle memory from a different life reasserted itself. This was the stance she'd used presenting to boards, defending her dissertation, pitching investors who'd wanted to give her money because they believed she would change the world. When she spoke, her voice carried across the dining room with the kind of projection she'd learned from her father, who could fill a lecture hall with 200 students without a microphone. Mr. Hargrove, you've used the word illiterate 4 times tonight. I don't think you understand what it means. The room held its breath. Hargrove blinked, confusion replacing rage for just a moment. He'd expected tears, expected begging, expected anything except this. A waitress speaking to him like an equal, like someone who had the right to rebuke him in public. Then his face darkened. Are you having a breakdown? Ron, get this woman out of here before I call the police. Victoria ignored him. The French came first because it was the language of diplomacy, of precision, of saying sharp things beautifully. Her accent was Parisian perfect, learned from 2 summers studying at the Sorbonne, back when her life had been full of possibilities. Monsieur Hargrove, vous confondez brutalité et pouvoir. Ce vin n'est pas bouchonné. C'est votre âme qui est corrompue par des années de cupidité et de cruauté. The translation scrolled through her mind even as the words left her mouth. Mr. Hargrove, you confuse brutality with power. This wine isn't corked. It's your soul that's corrupted by years of greed and cruelty. Hargrove's mouth opened. No sound emerged. Around the dining room, people who'd been pretending not to watch gave up pretense entirely. Victoria continued, switching to German because it was the language of philosophy and precision, each word a small explosion. Sie haben mein Unternehmen gestohlen, meine Zukunft zerstört, Meinen Vater ins Grab gebracht. Und jetzt nennen Sie mich ungebildet? Die Ironie wäre komisch, wenn sie nicht so tragisch wäre. You stole my company, destroyed my future, put my father in his grave, and now you call me uneducated? The irony would be funny if it weren't so tragic. Hargrove, but class is something you can never buy, no matter how many billions you steal from people better than you. A woman at table 5, CEO of a biotech firm, Victoria would learn later, set down her fork with a soft clink that sounded like applause in the silence. Spanish came next, formal Castilian that rolled through the room like a verdict. Usted construyó un imperio sobre las espaldas de los que llamó analfabetos. Pero los imperios caen. Y cuando caiga el suyo, y caerá, descubrirá que usted era el único analfabeto en esta habitación. You built an empire on the backs of those you called illiterate. But empires fall. And when yours falls, and it will, you'll discover you were the only illiterate in this room. Hargrove was standing now, face cycling through shades of red toward purple. Landon had pushed back from the table, distancing himself from whatever was happening, the junior associate suddenly understanding he was watching something career-defining. Victoria shifted to Portuguese, Brazilian inflection learned from a roommate at MIT who'd taught her swear words and poetry in equal measure. Você me chamou de vazia, de incompetente, de evolutivamente obsoleta. Mas eu falo 8 línguas. Quantas você fala, Sr. Hargrove? Uma. E mal. You called me empty, incompetent, evolutionarily obsolete. But I speak 8 languages. How many do you speak, Mr. Hargrove? 1. And poorly. Russian came next because it was the language of revolution. Hard consonants like gunfire. Вы думаете, что власть приходит от страха и денег, но настоящая власть приходит от уважения, чего вы никогда не узнаете, потому что вы покупаете людей вместо того, чтобы заслуживать их уважение. You think power comes from fear and money, but true power comes from respect, which you'll never know because you buy people instead of earning their respect. Arabic followed, modern standard with the careful enunciation her father had drilled into her when she was 14. You stole my app that taught people my languages, and now I'll use my languages to destroy everything you built on fraud and theft. A man at table 7 stood abruptly. Victoria, memento mori, Elliot Hargrove. Thus passes the glory of the world. What we are, you will be. Remember, you must die. The silence that followed felt geological, like the moment before an earthquake, when animals go quiet because they sense the ground preparing to betray them. Victoria pulled her phone from her apron pocket, the cheap Android she'd bought at a pawn shop, pay-as-you-go, untraceable to her real name. She pulled the second phone from her other pocket, the iPhone that still had her Victoria Ashford accounts, that she'd kept charged for this moment. Grace had helped her set it up during a slow Tuesday lunch shift, showing her how to connect to Bellamy's Bluetooth speaker system, the same system that played Django Reinhardt during service. Grace hadn't asked why. Some questions women learn not to ask. Victoria pressed play. Hargrove's voice filled the dining room, tinny but unmistakable from the speaker hidden above the bar. Yeah, I shorted Polyglot's debt before the bug leak. Made $11 million on the trade. Inside man Trevor Kent fed me everything. Emails, product roadmaps, bug reports. I hacked Ashford's email myself, hired Russian hackers for 50 grand. SEC won't catch me. Offshore accounts in Delaware and the Caymans. 5 shell companies. By the time it traces back, if it ever does, I'll have lawyers arguing coincidence. The recording played for 30 seconds. 30 seconds of Hargrove casually confessing to securities fraud, insider trading, computer crimes, all the casual criminality he discussed over wine, because he genuinely believed waitresses weren't people. Victoria stopped the playback. The silence returned, heavier now, loaded with the weight of revelation. Her voice when she spoke was steady, clear, the voice of someone who'd practiced this moment in her mind 1,000 times. My name is not Tessa Mills. I'm Dr. Victoria Ashford, bachelor's degree in linguistics from Bowdoin College, summa cum laude, PhD in computational linguistics from MIT, founder and CEO of Polyglot Pro, the company you stole 22 months ago through fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. Hargrove's face had gone from red to white, blood draining like someone had opened a valve. She continued, each word a nail. You called me illiterate. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on multilingual syntax acquisition across 8 language families. I speak 8 languages because I believe knowledge is a human right, not a commodity to be monetized. You use one language, English, and badly, to crush people economically and call it business. She lifted the phones, one in each hand. This phone contains 58 hours and 14 minutes of recordings. You discussing insider trading, securities fraud, bribing a senator to kill an antitrust bill, offshore tax evasion, sexual harassment of 3 female employees, all of whom you paid to sign NDAs, hiring hackers to access my private communications, conspiring with Trevor Kent to sabotage my company so you could buy it at a fraction of its value. The room had achieved a quality of silence that felt almost sacred. Every phone was out now, recording openly, the pretense of discretion abandoned. I submitted copies to the SEC this morning, to the FBI, to the Wall Street Journal, who will publish tomorrow at 6 a.m. I've also uploaded everything to encrypted cloud storage with a dead man's switch. If anything happens to me, it auto-releases to every major news organization in North America. Hargrove found his voice, and it came out strangled. You recorded illegally. Wiretapping. That's a felony. I'll have you arrested, sued, destroyed. The smile that crossed Victoria's face was not kind. Massachusetts is a one-party consent state for recording conversations, Mr. Hargrove. I am a party to every conversation on those recordings. Legal precedent, Commonwealth versus Jackson, 1998. The state Supreme Court was very clear. Unlike you, I did my homework before committing to a strategy. Landon Shaw stood, knocking his chair backward. His voice came out quiet but clear. I quit, Elliot. Effective immediately. I won't be part of this. He walked out, 35 years old, and finally understanding that proximity to power wasn't worth proximity to prison. The woman at table 5 stood next, slow and deliberate. She was in her 50s, silver-haired, the kind of person whose net worth was whispered about in venture capital circles. Her voice carried the confidence of someone who'd built legitimate success. Dr. Ashford, my name is Jillian Ross. I fund education technology through Ross Ventures. Call me Monday morning. I'd like to discuss investing in your next company. She placed a business card on Victoria's table, then walked out past Hargrove without a glance, erasing him through indifference more thoroughly than anger ever could. Nate Pierce approached from table 7. Up close, his eyes were wet, jaw tight with some emotion Victoria couldn't quite parse. He didn't acknowledge Hargrove at all, spoke only to her. Victoria, why didn't you call me? That check I gave you. Her voice cracked for the first time. I couldn't. I needed to do this myself. You did, and I've never been prouder of someone I barely know. He paused, something breaking in his careful wasp control. My daughter would have liked you, Isabel. She had your fire, your refusal to be diminished. I'm not your daughter. No. His voice dropped to something almost too quiet to hear. But you're the closest thing I have left to her. So please, for once in your stubborn life, let someone help you. Before Victoria could respond, Hargrove erupted. He grabbed for her phone, the one still playing evidence of his crimes. She stepped back, smooth and quick, years of waiting tables teaching her to read aggression in bodies before it became action. His voice came out ragged. Security, this woman someone arrest her. She's recorded me illegally. She's harassing me. She's telling the truth. Grace Sullivan's voice from behind the bar, 62 years old and done being quiet. I helped her set up the Bluetooth. Everything she said is true. I heard it all, every Friday for 12 weeks. You're a criminal, Mr. Hargrove, and worse, you're a bully. Ron, the manager, stood frozen, iPad clutched to his chest like a life preserver, eyes darting between Hargrove and Victoria as he calculated which side of history would hurt his tips less. Victoria made the choice for him. She pulled out a $20 bill, absurdly the last 20 she had until tomorrow's shift that she just quit, and placed it on the table. For the wine I'm not serving, I'll show myself out. She walked toward the door, not running, not hurrying, just walking with the kind of dignity that comes from knowing you've already won, even if the cost hasn't been tallied yet. The whispers started as she passed tables. Who was that? Did that really just happen? Hargrove's finished. Someone find out her name, the real one. She pushed through Bellamy's heavy oak door into Boston night. Rain had started, cold October rain that smelled like the harbor and coming winter. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation drained away in seconds, leaving her shaking, gasping, leaning against wet brick because her legs had forgotten how to hold her weight. The enormity crashed down. She just quit the only income she had publicly destroyed a billionaire who'd already proven he could orchestrate her ruin, had recorded herself committing what might be crimes even if she believed the law was on her side, had done it all on faith that the evidence was enough, that the truth mattered, that speaking power to power wouldn't just get her killed. Her phone, the Victoria Ashford phone, showed 237 notifications in the 15 minutes since she'd walked out. The video was already viral, spreading across Twitter and TikTok and LinkedIn, strangers debating whether she was a hero or a stalker, whether Hargrove was a criminal or a victim, whether any of this was real or performance art. She ignored it all, walked 4 blocks through rain to the Green Line station, rode the T to Lechmere, then caught a bus north to Meadowbrook Skilled Nursing, arriving after visiting hours, but the night nurse let her in because the night nurse was kind and underpaid and understood desperation when she saw it. Philip was sleeping, breathing the shallow breaths of someone whose body was failing by degrees. Victoria pulled a chair close, took his hand, papery skin over bird bones, and let herself cry for the first time in 12 weeks. She'd done it, spoken truth, refused to be silent, used language as a weapon the way her father had taught her, and now she had to live with the consequences. Her phone buzzed. Text from unknown number. Dr. Ashford, I work for Hargrove 11 years. I have evidence worse than what you showed tonight. Evidence that will end him completely. Meet me tomorrow, noon, Prudential Center Food Court. I'll wear a red scarf. Come alone. H. Victoria stared at the message. It could be a trap. Could be Hargrove's lawyers setting up an entrapment case. Could be anything. But it could also be real. Could be another woman Hargrove had broken who finally had permission to speak. She typed back, "How do I know I can trust you?" The response came 30 seconds later. "You don't. But I watched your video 17 times tonight. You gave me courage. Now I'm giving you ammunition. Tomorrow, noon, red scarf. Please." Philip stirred in his sleep, murmured something in Latin. Verba volant, scripta manent. Words fly, writing remains. The phrase he'd taught her when she was learning the difference between speech and documentation. Victoria looked at her father, looked at her phone, looked at the choice in front of her. She could run, could take Ethan's offer to disappear to Seattle, could let lawyers and courts and the slow machinery of justice handle what came next. Or she could meet the woman in the red scarf, could gather the evidence that would turn a viral moment into an actual case, could refuse to stop fighting just because she'd won a battle. She typed, "I'll be there." Then she sat with her father in the dark, listening to rain against windows, and waited for morning to bring whatever came next. The Prudential Center Food Court smelled like competing franchises locked in olfactory warfare. cinnamon and grease and coffee, all fighting for dominance in recycled air. Victoria arrived 20 minutes early, bought tea she couldn't afford with money she definitely didn't have, found a table with clear sightlines to every entrance. Old habits from a life where she'd negotiated with people who smiled while calculating how to destroy you. The morning had brought chaos in waves. Wall Street Journal published at 6 a.m. exactly as promised. Hargrove Capital CEO caught on tape admitting securities fraud. Viral video exposes years of corruption. By 7, CNBC was running the restaurant footage on loop. By 8, 3 different law firms had called her disconnected phone number asking to represent her. By 9, the FBI had issued a statement confirming they were opening an investigation into Hargrove Capital based on new evidence. By 10, Hargrove's lawyers had filed a $75 million defamation suit and announced criminal wiretapping charges they'd be pursuing with the Massachusetts Attorney General. The polarization was instant and vicious. Half the internet crowned her a hero, #Justice for Victoria trending worldwide. GoFundMe campaigns she hadn't authorized, raising money she hadn't asked for. The other half called her a stalker, a psycho, a bitter ex-employee weaponizing victimhood. Fox Business ran a segment, "Is cancel culture coming for legitimate businessmen?" A men's rights forum posted her old address with suggestions that got specific enough the FBI called to offer protection she couldn't afford. Ethan had called 17 times. Her mother, 19. She'd answered none of them, just texted, "I'm fine, I'll explain later, don't worry." Words that meant nothing because mothers always worried and brothers always knew when you were lying. The woman appeared at 11:58, 2 minutes early, which meant she was either punctual or paranoid, or both. Red scarf exactly as promised, wound around her neck despite the food court's aggressive heating. Blonde hair going gray at the temples, sunglasses indoors, body language screaming, "Please don't notice me in a place designed for anonymity." She scanned the crowd twice before her eyes found Victoria. Something passed across her face. Recognition, relief, fear all braided together. She purchased nothing, just walked directly to the table and sat without asking permission. Up close, she was 43, trying to look 35. Expensive work done on her face, but exhaustion bleeding through the Botox. Hands shaking as she removed the sunglasses to reveal eyes that had cried recently and often. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Dr. Ashford, thank you for coming. I'm Hannah Cole." Victoria kept her own voice neutral. "Your text said you have evidence. 11 years I worked for him. Executive assistant. I knew everything, his schedule, his passwords, his secrets. The things he said when he thought I was just furniture." Hannah's laugh was broken glass. "Guess we have that in common. Why did you leave?" The pause stretched long enough to hurt. Hannah's hands twisted the scarf, knuckles white. "He assaulted me. Not rape, but close enough. 9 months ago in his office after everyone left. I fought back. He stopped. But the message was clear. Sleep with him or lose everything." "You reported it?" "To HR. His company. His HR. They offered $80,000 to sign an NDA and disappear. I took it because I have a daughter in college and a mother in hospice, and I was tired of fighting." Tears started, stopped through visible effort. "But I kept copies. Of everything. Emails he thought I deleted. Recordings from meetings where I took notes. Photos of documents he asked me to shred, but I photographed first." She pulled a USB drive from her purse, set it on the table between them like an offering. "Proof of insider trading on 14 companies, not just yours. Offshore accounts holding $47 million in untaxed income. Video of him bribing Senator Whitmore to kill an antitrust bill. Evidence of sexual harassment against 3 other women, all paid to stay quiet. Everything you'd need to put him in prison for the rest of his life." Victoria stared at the drive. It was silver, corporate branded, the kind of thing you'd get free at a tech conference. It looked too ordinary to contain the destruction of a man's empire. Why now? Why not before? Hannah's smile was bitter. Because I was a coward. Because 80,000 bought my silence and my soul. Because I told myself it wasn't my fight, wasn't my problem. Someone else would stop him eventually. She met Victoria's eyes directly for the first time. Then I watched your video last night. Watched you stand there and refuse to be small. Watched you speak 8 languages to a man who couldn't understand you were calling him evil to his face. And I realized, if you could do that after losing everything, I could do this with nothing left to lose. He'll come after you. He has resources, lawyers. I know, that's why I need protection. Witness protection program, immunity deal, something. Hannah's voice cracked. I'm scared. I'm so scared I can barely breathe. But I'm more scared of looking at myself in 10 years and knowing I let him keep doing this to other women because I was too afraid to speak. Victoria took the USB drive, held it up to the light like she could see through plastic to the data inside. I'll need to verify this. Could be anything on here. It's organized by crime type, folder structure, everything labeled. I was his assistant for 11 years. I know how to document. Hannah stood, rewound the scarf around her neck. My number's on a text file in the root directory. When you're ready to move forward, call me. I'll testify to anything. Just keep me alive long enough to do it. She walked away before Victoria could respond, disappearing into the food court crowd like she'd never existed at all. Victoria sat alone with the drive, turning it over in her fingers, feeling the weight of choices compounding. She could take this to the FBI, could be a hero or a target, or probably both. Could burn Hargrove down so completely there'd be nothing left but ash and criminal conviction. Or she could walk away, delete everything, take Jillian Ross's investment offer and disappear into building something new. Let lawyers and prosecutors in the slow machinery of justice handle what came next without making herself the center of more attention. Her phone rang. Nate Pierce. She answered for the first time since the restaurant. His voice was tight with something between anger and fear. Where are you? Are you safe? I've been trying to reach you since last night. I'm fine. I'm at Prudential Center. Stay there. I'm 10 minutes away. Don't move. He hung up before she could argue. He arrived in 8 minutes, which meant he'd been driving like someone with diplomatic immunity. Dressed down for him, khakis and a sweater instead of the Brooks Brothers uniform, but still unmistakably old money, the kind of casual that costs more than most people's formal. He slid into the chair Hannah had vacated, studied Victoria's face like he was cataloging damage. You look terrible. Thanks, you look worried. I am worried. Hargrove's lawyers filed criminal wiretapping charges this morning. They're arguing you stalked him, recorded him illegally with intent to extort. They have a prosecutor in Suffolk County who's willing to pursue it. Victoria's laugh came out hollow. So I expose his crimes and I'm the criminal? That's how power works. You know that better than most. Nate leaned forward, voice dropping. I've retained Curtis Brennan for you, best criminal defense attorney in Massachusetts. Formerly federal prosecutor, he knows the system inside out. I can't afford. You're not paying. I am. And before you start with the pride, understand this isn't charity. This is penance. His eyes were raw, the careful wasp armor cracking enough to show the wound beneath. I could have stopped Hargrove in that boardroom. I had enough influence to make noise, call in favors, force a real investigation of his share purchases before the vote. But I didn't because I was protecting my investment, my reputation, my comfort. I let him destroy you because speaking up would have been inconvenient. You voted against my removal. I voted. I didn't fight. There's a difference. He pulled out his phone, showed her a photo, young woman, 29, laughing on a sailboat, blonde hair whipping in wind. Isabel, my daughter, she was killed by a drunk driver 2 years ago. Preventable. The driver had 3 prior DUIs, but his father was a state senator, so he kept getting slaps on the wrist. The senator called me, asked me to speak at the sentencing, say the family forgave him, help his son avoid prison. What did you do? Nothing. I was too broken to fight, too tired, too buried in grief. So the kid got probation and 6 months later, he killed someone else's daughter. Nate's voice went hoarse. You don't get to sit out fights against evil because they're inconvenient. That's how evil wins. I learned that too late to save Isabel. I won't learn it too late to help you. Victoria felt something in her chest unknot slightly, the loneliness she'd been carrying easing by a fraction. You've already done so much. The check you gave me, offering to help, I can't keep taking from you. You're not taking, I'm giving. And there's a difference between charity and restitution. His jaw tightened. I failed my daughter when she needed me most. Not just with the drunk driver. Before that. She called me the night she died, wanted to talk about leaving her teaching job because the district was cutting funding. I was in a board meeting. I told her I'd call back later. I never got the chance. He met Victoria's eyes directly. So no, you're not my daughter, but helping you is the only way I know how to live with the fact that I didn't help her. Good. He's waiting at my office. We'll go now. Nate stood, then paused. What's on the USB drive you keep holding? She'd almost forgotten she was gripping it. More evidence. A woman who worked for Hargrove. She says it's worse than what I have. Have you verified it? Not yet. Then let's go do that. Brennan will want to see it too. They drove in Nate's Tesla, silent through Boston traffic, Victoria watching the city slide past, and wondering when she'd stop feeling like she belonged here. Nate's office was in the financial district, 20th floor with views of the harbor, the kind of space that whispered old money so quietly you almost didn't notice the shouting. Curtis Brennan was waiting in the conference room, 62 years old and built like someone who'd played rugby in college and never quite stopped being physical. Gray beard, wire-rimmed glasses, three-piece suit that looked comfortable rather than performative. He stood when they entered, handshake firm. Dr. Ashford, pleasure to meet you, though I wish circumstances were better. I've reviewed everything Nate sent. You're in a legally complex position. Meaning I'm screwed? Meaning it depends on how we frame the narrative. He gestured for them to sit, pulled out a yellow legal pad already covered in notes. The wiretapping charges are bullshit. Massachusetts is one-party consent. You were party to all conversations. Legal precedent is clear. But Hargrove's team will argue you had no legitimate reason to record, that you were building a harassment case, that you stalked him by deliberately working at a restaurant he frequented. I needed the job. He happened to be there. That's the story. We stick to it. Bigger problem is the defamation suit. $75 million for damage to reputation and business interests. They'll argue your video was malicious, designed to destroy him financially, regardless of truth. Victoria felt ice in her stomach. Can they win? Not if the evidence holds up. Truth is absolute defense to defamation. If everything on those recordings is factual and provable, they have no case. He paused, eyes sharp. Is it? Factual and provable? She slid the USB drive across the table. This might help answer that question. Brennan plugged it into his laptop. The folder structure appeared, organized exactly as Hannah promised, labeled by crime type: insider trading, tax evasion, bribery, sexual harassment, corporate espionage. Hundreds of files, thousands of pages of documentation, video files, audio recordings, emails with headers intact. They spent 3 hours going through it. Victoria watched Brennan's expression shift from professional skepticism to grim satisfaction to something like horror as the scope emerged. Anna hadn't just collected evidence. She'd built a prosecutable case, organized by statute and criminal code, cross-referenced with dates and witnesses. When they finished, Brennan sat back, removed his glasses to rub his eyes. This is the most comprehensive documentation of white-collar crime I've seen in 40 years of practice. If a quarter of this is admissible, Hargrove dies in prison. All of it's admissible? Most, unless his lawyers can prove it was obtained illegally, but she was his assistant. She had legitimate access to almost everything here. The recordings are trickier, but if she can testify she made them in the course of her duties, documenting conversations she was asked to attend. He trailed off, mind clearly working through angles. We need to protect her. Witness protection, immunity deal. I have contacts at the FBI. Nate's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, face darkening. SEC just announced formal investigation into Hargrove Capital. They're freezing assets pending review. How fast did they move? Victoria's surprise was genuine. Faster than normal, which means someone high up wants this prosecuted. Nate showed them the Bloomberg alert. Stocks already down 40% in pre-market trading. Brennan started making calls. First to the FBI, voice clipped and professional, talking to someone he clearly knew well. Then to the SEC, then to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, where Hargrove Capital was incorporated. Victoria sat in a leather chair worth more than her monthly salary used to be, watching her lawyer orchestrate the destruction of a man who destroyed her first. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing on a cliff edge, wind pushing her toward a fall she couldn't see the bottom of. Her phone buzzed. Text from unknown number. You destroyed my life. I will destroy yours. Every person you love will pay for what you did. Count on it. EH. She showed it to Brennan without speaking. He read it, jaw tightening. Forward that to me immediately. That's witness intimidation, possibly conspiracy to commit violence. I'll get a restraining order filed today. Will it help? Legally, yes. Practically? He shrugged. Angry billionaires with nothing to lose are dangerous. We'll arrange security for you and your father. I can't afford, Nate cut her off. Yes, you can, because I'm paying. And before you argue, understand this isn't negotiable. Isabel died because I didn't fight when fighting mattered. You're fighting. I'm making sure you survive it. The next 2 weeks became a blur of depositions and legal filings and media requests Victoria refused. Hannah came forward publicly, gave an interview to 60 Minutes that aired on Sunday, and broke viewership records. 2 more women contacted Brennan saying Hargrove had assaulted them too, that they'd signed NDAs but wanted to testify. The SEC expanded their investigation to 14 companies. The FBI raided Hargrove Capital offices, carting out boxes of documents while cameras recorded everything. Senator Whitmore resigned, citing health reasons, the day after video emerged of Hargrove handing him an envelope of cash. And through it all, Victoria visited her father every other day, sat beside him in the facilities she still couldn't afford, read him poetry and languages he'd taught her. Sometimes he recognized her, sometimes he didn't. Once he spoke clearly, gripping her hand with surprising strength. You spoke truth. Your mother would be proud. Her mother had died of cancer when Victoria was 16. The fact that Philip remembered her at all felt like grace. The bankruptcy court dismissed the personal guarantee lawsuit, ruling Hargrove had obtained it through fraud. The investor's case fell apart when emails emerged showing they'd known about the bug before Victoria did, that they'd pressured Trevor to hide it until after Series B closed. Trevor was arrested trying to flee to Costa Rica, flipped within hours, agreed to testify against Hargrove in exchange for reduced charges. Jillian Ross made good on her promise, invested $3 million in Victoria's new company, Open Lingua, a non-profit focused on language education for refugees and immigrants. Everything Polyglot Pro should have been without the venture capital pressure to monetize desperation. And 6 months after the confrontation at Bellamy's, Victoria sat in federal court, Southern District of New York, watching the government's case against Elliot Hargrove unfold like a public execution conducted through paperwork. The prosecutor was Rebecca Torres, 38 and sharp as a scalpel, the kind of attorney who turned down 7-figure law firm offers to make 40% as much putting rich criminals in prison. She laid out the case in methodical detail. 52 counts including securities fraud, wire fraud, insider trading, racketeering, tax evasion, obstruction of justice. The defense tried. Alan Reed was expensive, experienced, had gotten acquittals for CEOs everyone knew were guilty. He argued Hargrove was a self-made man from poverty, that aggressive business tactics weren't crimes, that the recordings were taken out of context by a bitter ex-employee with an axe to grind. But the evidence was too much. Victoria's 58 hours, plus Hannah's documentation, plus Trevor's testimony, plus the other victims, plus the financial forensics that traced every offshore dollar. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, came back with guilty on all counts. Sentencing happened 2 months later. Hargrove stood in orange jumpsuit, looking smaller than Victoria remembered. The performative dominance gone, leaving only a 57-year-old man who'd spent his life accumulating power and now faced its absolute loss. The judge was a woman, 64, appointed by Obama, who'd grown up in the Bronx and never forgot what poverty tasted like. Her voice carried the weight of every person Hargrove had crushed. Mr. Hargrove, you exploited the system you claimed to master. You destroyed lives for profit. You treated people as disposable because you'd learned that money insulates from consequences. You were wrong. Sentence is 12 years federal prison, $80 million in fines, lifetime ban from securities industry. Hargrove's eyes found Victoria in the gallery. She met his gaze steadily, waited for the anger or the pleading or the promises of revenge. Instead, he just looked tired, defeated, human in a way he'd never allowed himself to be when he had power. His voice came out barely audible. You destroyed me. She responded clearly enough for the whole courtroom to hear. No, you destroyed yourself. I held the mirror. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Victoria had learned to navigate them, had gotten better at the performance of confidence. She kept it brief. I'm not vindictive. I'm persistent. There's a difference. I didn't want Richard Hargrove in prison. I wanted truth. The court decided justice. That night she drove to Meadowbrook, found her father alert and present, the best he'd been in months. She told him about the sentencing, about OpenLingua's growing user base, about the speaking invitations from MIT and Harvard and Stanford. He listened, eyes tracking her face, and when she finished, he spoke in Latin, the language still most comfortable to him. Veritas lux mea. Truth is my light. You taught me that. I taught you words. You learned how to make them matter. His hand found hers, grip weak, but intentional. Language without courage is just noise. You found courage. She stayed until he fell asleep, then drove to the office OpenLingua rented in Cambridge. Nothing fancy, just converted warehouse space with good Wi-Fi and used furniture. But it was hers without anyone able to take it. Ethan was there, her brother who'd moved from Seattle to be CTO, who was building the algorithms Victoria designed. He looked up from his computer. Sentencing go okay? 12 years. He'll be 70 when he gets out, if he lives that long. You feel good about it? Victoria considered the question honestly. I feel done. There's a difference. Hannah messaged later that night, thank you for giving me permission to speak, for showing me silence protects monsters. I start my new job Monday, victim advocate, helping other women find their voices. Victoria replied, you gave yourself permission. I just went first. The next 18 months passed in a rhythm that felt almost like peace. OpenLingua grew to 2.1 million users, partnerships with UNHCR and refugee resettlement organizations, funding from foundations that cared more about impact than exits. Philip's condition stabilized, some experimental therapy making small improvements in his speech and mobility. Ethan met someone, a woman who made him laugh, who didn't mind that his sister was famous for destroying billionaires. Nate became a constant, Sunday dinners at his house in Brookline, conversations about books and art, and the burden of having resources in a world that needed them. He was teaching Victoria to sail, something about reading wind and water that felt like learning a new language. And then the parole notification arrived. Elliot Hargrove, released after 6 years for good behavior and cooperation with other federal investigations. Address listed as a rental in New Jersey, restrictions on travel, electronic monitoring, conditions that marked him as someone the system no longer trusted but couldn't keep locked up forever. Victoria read the letter twice, waiting for the fear or anger to come. Instead, she felt something closer to pity, understanding that Hargrove's real prison wasn't the facility he'd left, but the life he'd returned to. No power, no money beyond what wasn't seized, no respect from the world that had once feared him. Her phone buzzed. Email from an address she didn't recognize, subject line, blank. The message was brief. Dr. Ashford, I'm writing a memoir about my mistakes and their consequences. Working title, The Language of Failure. My publisher says it needs your perspective to have credibility. Would you be willing to speak with me? Not for redemption, I don't believe in that anymore, but for understanding, for completeness. I won't ask for forgiveness, just truth. Elliot Hargrove. She stared at the screen, cursor blinking in the reply field. Every instinct said, delete, block, move on. The man had tried to destroy her, had succeeded in destroying her temporarily, had threatened her loved ones, had filed lawsuits designed to bankrupt her, had used every weapon money could buy. But he'd also been a boy from West Virginia whose father died in a mine, had built something from nothing, had warped into a monster not because he was born evil, but because the system rewarded cruelty, and he'd learned his lessons well. Nate called before she could decide. You see the parole notification? And an email. He wants to interview me for a book. Silence on the line, Nate thinking through implications. What are you going to do? I don't know. Part of me wants to delete it. Part of me... She trailed off, trying to find language for something she barely understood herself. Wants to understand him? Wants to make sure he actually learned something, that the last 6 years changed him, that some version of justice actually works. She laughed, hollow. Naive, probably. Not naive, hopeful. There's a difference. Nate paused. If you do meet him, I'd like to be there. Not to interfere, just for safety. You don't trust him? I don't trust men who've had everything taken from them. They either become better or worse, nothing in between. Victoria thought about it for 3 days, discussed it with Brennan, who advised against it, with Ethan, who said she'd earned the right to do whatever felt right, with Hannah, who understood better than anyone. Hannah's text was succinct. He took everything from both of us. If talking to him gives you closure, do it. If it reopens wounds, don't. You don't owe him anything, but you owe yourself peace. In the end, Victoria agreed. Neutral location, public place, Nate present but silent unless needed. She suggested a coffee shop in Cambridge, equidistant from his restrictions and her comfort zone. The day arrived cold and bright, December sun doing nothing to warm the air. Victoria arrived early, claimed a table with her back to the wall, old instincts about sight lines and exits never quite fading. Hargrove came through the door at exactly 2 p.m., punctual in a way he'd never been when he had power to make others wait. He'd aged a decade in 6 years, hair gone white, face lined, body thinner in a way that suggested illness, or stress, or both. His clothes were department store normal, the Brioni suits gone along with everything else. He moved carefully, like someone aware his presence was unwelcome anywhere he went. He saw her, stopped, something complicated crossing his face. Then he approached, slowly enough to give her time to object. She didn't, just gestured to the chair across from her. Mr. Hargrove. Dr. Ashford, thank you for meeting me. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure either. Nate sat at a table 10 feet away, reading a newspaper but clearly listening. Hargrove glanced at him, recognition dawning. Mr. Pierce, you invested in her company. Both of them. And I'll invest in everything she does for the rest of my life. Nate's voice was cordial ice. Continue your conversation. I'm just here for insurance. Hargrove turned back to Victoria, hands folded on the table. I want to say I'm sorry. I know those words are inadequate, but I need to say them anyway. Why now? Because prison strips away everything except who you actually are. And it turns out I didn't like who I was. Took me 3 years to admit that. Another 3 to understand why. He pulled a notebook from his jacket, worn leather, pages filled with handwriting. My therapist, court-mandated but genuinely helpful, had me write about every person I hurt. Real names, real stories. Trying to see them as humans instead of obstacles. Your name appears 73 times. 73? Every domino I pushed to take your company, every decision to hurt you instead of compete fairly. Every time I justified cruelty as business. His eyes met hers, red-rimmed and raw. I told myself I was teaching you how the world works. Truth is, I was proving to myself I'd escaped where I came from by becoming exactly what I hated. Victoria studied him, looking for the performance, the angle, the manipulation. Found only exhaustion in something that looked like genuine regret. What do you want from me? Nothing. I know those words sound like lies coming from me, but I mean them. You don't owe me forgiveness. You don't owe me anything. I just wanted you to know that what you did, standing up, refusing to be silent, it changed things. Not just my prosecution. The SEC created new whistleblower protections because of your case. 3 other women came forward about their CEOs. You made it possible for people to speak. That wasn't why I did it. I know. You did it because I pushed you past the point where silence was survivable. But the consequences rippled beyond us both. He opened the notebook to a marked page. Can I ask you something? For the book? Depends on the question. Do you remember the wine? The Chateau Margaux I said was corked? Victoria's laugh caught her by surprise. Of course, it wasn't corked. It was perfect. I know. I lied because I wanted to humiliate you. Wanted to prove I could make truth whatever I said it was. His voice went quiet. But that's not what I'm asking. The question is, if you could go back, knowing everything that came after, would you still confront me? Would you still speak? She didn't hesitate. Yes, because silence protects abusers. Speaking might destroy the speaker, but silence guarantees the abuse continues. I chose noise over safety. I'd choose it again. Even knowing it cost you everything? It didn't cost everything. It cost comfort, but it bought dignity. And dignity appreciates while comfort depreciates. She leaned forward slightly. Here's what I learned, Mr. Hargrove. Power doesn't come from crushing others. It comes from lifting yourself without needing to push anyone else down. You built an empire on extraction. I'm building something on contribution. When I die, people will remember I tried to help. When you die, they'll remember you tried to hurt. That's the only legacy that matters. Silence stretched between them. Heavy with truth, neither could escape. Hargrove closed his notebook, stood slowly. Thank you for your time, for your honesty. I hope your father recovers. I hope your company succeeds. I hope you find peace. He walked out before she could respond, disappearing into Cambridge afternoon like a ghost released from haunting. Nate came to her table, sat in the chair Hargrove had vacated. You okay? I think so. He seemed different. Broken in a way that might actually lead to being better. Or he's a narcissist who learned to perform remorse. Hard to tell with people like that. Maybe, but I choose to believe people can change. Not because I trust him, but because giving up on the possibility of change means accepting the world as it is, instead of as it could be. They sat together watching traffic pass, students hurrying between classes, the ordinary machinery of a world continuing whether or not individual stories resolve cleanly. Victoria's phone buzzed. Text from Hannah. Board meeting went well. Just got approved for expansion. Adding 4 more counselors. Will help twice as many survivors next year. Another buzz, this one from Ethan. New feature just launched. 50,000 signups in the first hour. We're going to need more servers. Then one from Philip's facility. Your father asked for you. Said he has something important to tell you. Can you come today? She showed the messages to Nate. Life continues, whether we're ready or not. That's the secret they don't tell you when you're young. You think there's a finish line, a moment when everything resolves and you can rest. But life just keeps happening. The work just continues. Is that depressing or hopeful? Both. Neither. Depends on the day. He stood, offered his hand. Come on, let's go see your father. Then Sunday dinner at my place. I'm making that ossobuco you liked. They drove north together, conversation drifting between the consequential and the mundane, the way most human connection actually worked when stripped of performance. At Meadowbrook, they found Philip sitting up in bed, more alert than he'd been in months. He saw Victoria and his face transformed. Victoria, my brilliant girl. She took his hand, felt the familiar papery skin, the bones prominent beneath. Hi, Dad. They said you wanted to tell me something? I remembered. Today. Woke up and I remembered everything. Tears started, years of confusion and loss suddenly clear enough to grieve. I'm so proud of you. Not for destroying him, for refusing to become him. That's harder. That's the real victory. You taught me that. All those languages, all those lessons about how words shape reality, you taught me to speak. I taught you vocabulary. You learned to use it with courage. That part was always yours. He looked at Nate, recognition dawning. You're the investor, the one who lost a daughter. Yes, sir. Thank you for protecting mine when I couldn't. They stayed until he fell asleep, exhausted by the effort of remembering. Outside, winter twilight painted the parking lot in shades of blue and gray. Nate broke the silence. He won't have many more days like this. The clarity. I know, but you'll remember this one. When he knew you and told you he was proud. Some people never get that. Are you speaking from experience? Isabel and I fought our last conversation. Something stupid about her choice to teach instead of going to law school like I wanted. She died angry at me. I'd give everything I have for one more chance to tell her I was wrong. That her choice was brave and right and exactly who she was supposed to be. Victoria linked her arm through his, the gesture small but intentional. Tell her now, out loud. She'll hear it somehow. You believe that? I believe the universe wastes nothing. Not words, not love, not the effort to repair what we've broken. She looked up at the facility where her father slept. We speak the languages we're given. The trick is learning to say what matters before silence becomes permanent. They stood there as streetlights flickered on, two people bound by loss and chosen connection, understanding that family was sometimes the people you found rather than the ones you were given. Inside, Philip dreamed in Latin and English, and all the languages he'd taught his daughter. Somewhere in New Jersey, Elliot Hargrove wrote in his notebook about amends and consequences. In Cambridge, open linguist servers handled another surge of students, learning to speak across the boundaries that separated them. And Victoria Ashford, 33 years old and no longer afraid, drove toward dinner with the man who'd become her father in all the ways that mattered, ready for whatever language tomorrow required her to speak.